The CNN studio lights burned bright as Jonathan Roumie took his seat across from Andrew Tate. Calm, composed, and dressed in a simple charcoal suit, Roumie's presence carried the quiet intensity of a man who had come prepared. Across from him, Tate lounged back in his chair, grinning, dressed in a designer jacket and sunglasses he refused to remove under the studio lights. Tate had just finished his usual tirade, a mix of hyper-masculine posturing and declarations that modern weakness was destroying Western society. He spoke with the conviction of someone who had never been challenged by facts, or perhaps never cared to be. Then Jonathan leaned forward. He pulled out his phone with slow, deliberate calm and said just 4 words that would stop the internet in its tracks. "Let me show you something." The air in the CNN studio changed. Tension snapped through the space like a drawn bowstring. The camera didn't need to zoom in. You could feel the shift through the screen. Tate, smug and relaxed, thought he was about to dominate another polite guest who wouldn't dare confront him directly. He had no idea he was walking into a confrontation crafted with surgical precision, one that would unravel years of his carefully constructed public image in front of millions. Before we get into how this soft-spoken actor, best known for portraying Jesus Christ on television, quietly dismantled one of the internet's loudest provocateurs, don't forget to like this story and subscribe. You're going to want to see every second of this takedown, because this wasn't just a debate. This was truth facing off against arrogance, and arrogance never stood a chance. To understand why this moment mattered, you need to understand who these men are. Jonathan Roumie, now in his late 40s, rose to fame for his role in The Chosen, a series that has touched millions with its deeply human and spiritual portrayal of Jesus of Nazareth. But Roumie is not just an actor. He's a man of faith who has used his platform to speak openly about integrity, humility, and the dangerous allure of ego-driven culture. He doesn't raise his voice, he doesn't insult, but when he speaks, people listen. Not because he demands attention, but because truth has a tone you recognize instantly. Andrew Tate, on the other hand, represents everything Roumie warns against. Loud, flashy, obsessed with control, dominance, and wealth. A former kickboxer turned social media icon, Tate has amassed millions of followers by preaching an extreme version of masculinity rooted in power, submission, and often contempt for women, for faith, for anyone he considers weak. He calls himself the realist in a world of sheep. But behind the persona lies a long trail of legal troubles, banned accounts, and public outrage. His critics accuse him of misogyny, manipulation, and using spiritual language for self-glorification. His defenders call him brave and anti-establishment. But one thing is certain, Tate had never sat across from someone like Jonathan Roumie. This CNN appearance wasn't just a segment, it was a reckoning. Tate had been making media rounds, promoting his newest truth program, pushing conspiracy theories about society being enslaved by softness and lies. Most shows let him rant uninterrupted. They either feared the backlash or wanted the views. But Jonathan Roumie didn't come for views. He came for truth. Millions were watching. Social media had already lit up with speculation. Could this gentle man, this unexpected moral counterweight, really go head-to-head with one of the internet's most volatile figures? The stage was set. The segment began ordinarily enough. CNN host Anderson Cooper welcomed both guests, introducing the topic, truth in modern media and the influence of public figures. Tate smirked, adjusted his gold watch, and leaned back in his chair. Roumie sat forward slightly, hands folded, a leather notebook and phone beside him. Anderson's eyes twinkled with subtle anticipation. "We'll be fact-checking claims in real time," he said. "We've invited both guests to present any evidence they'd like to share with viewers." Tate chuckled. "Evidence? Brother, I am the evidence. Just look at my life." He laughed at his own bravado. Roumie gave a small smile but said nothing. He simply nodded as if encouraging Tate to go on, which, as it would turn out, was exactly his plan. For weeks, Roumie's team had been quietly compiling hours of Andrew Tate's own video clips, interviews, and contradictory statements, carefully selected, thoroughly verified, not to shame him, but to reveal the truth buried under years of smoke and mirrors. Roumie called it the mirror file, not an attack, a reflection. Tate came out swinging. "Society is collapsing," he declared, "because people worship weakness, because real men are being silenced, because beta males like Jonathan here play Jesus on TV, but wouldn't last 5 minutes in the real world." Roumie didn't flinch. He calmly jotted a few notes. Tate's voice rose. We need power, control, dominance. That's how empires are built. That's how truth is enforced. Not with feelings, not with humility, with force. Roumie looked at him for a moment, then glanced at his notebook. He still didn't speak. Tate mistook the silence for fear. He kept going, louder, faster. Accusations, distortions, prideful boasts. He invoked faith, twisted scripture, mocked empathy. He was building a fire, unaware he was soaking it in gasoline. And Jonathan Roumie was holding the match. For several minutes, Andrew Tate launched into a tirade of misinformation so bold, it bordered on surreal. He declared that Western civilization is collapsing because of feminized men and fake faith. He accused churches of being weak and afraid to stand up for real power. He called out spiritual leaders by name, accusing them of promoting submission instead of strength. As he spoke, his voice grew louder, his arms slicing through the air as if he were fighting an invisible enemy. He was performing, not informing. Performing for his millions of online followers who tuned in to hear him rail against modern society. Every lie came wrapped in confidence, every distortion cloaked in certainty. Even though Roumie's team had already uncovered dozens of clips where Tate contradicted himself, denying the very things he now claimed to stand for. Tate leaned in and pointed directly at Roumie. You're the problem, man. You and guys like you. Playing Jesus on TV, telling men to be meek. You make weakness look holy. You make submission look sacred. And then you wonder why the world is falling apart. Roumie's pen moved slowly across his notepad. A calm half-smile played at the corner of his mouth. He was keeping score, quietly, deliberately. Each exaggeration Tate spewed added another line to the case Jonathan was preparing. Tate continued, his energy climbing. And the real conspiracy? The fake churches, the media puppets, the tech elites censoring the truth. They banned me from Twitter because I told men to take control of their lives. They demonetized me because I said God gave us strength, not submission. His voice rose with each sentence. It was a classic Gish gallop, overwhelming his opponent with so many half-truths, distortions, and provocations that it became impossible to untangle them all in real time. Behind the scenes, CNN's fact-checkers were working in overdrive, preparing on-screen graphics to counter his claims. But Jonathan Roumie had come with something stronger than rebuttals. He had Tate's own words. Throughout the barrage, Roumie didn't interrupt. He didn't challenge. He waited. Not passively, but purposefully. He let Tate get comfortable in his own echo. Let him commit to the story. Let him dig the grave a little deeper with each sentence. Social media exploded with impatience. Why isn't Roumie saying anything? Why is he letting Tate lie without resistance? But those who understood who Jonathan was, what he believed, knew exactly what he was doing. He was setting the stage for truth, quietly, precisely, unshakably. Finally, after nearly 8 minutes of this high-speed unraveling of reality, Anderson Cooper turned to Roumie. Jonathan, he said, how do you respond to all of that? The air changed again. Roumie didn't flinch. He turned his calm gaze to Tate and offered the faintest smile. Andrew, he said gently, thank you for showing the audience exactly what you believe. You have made it very clear. And now, he reached for his phone. I think it's time we compare that to what you have actually said when the cameras weren't staged and the lighting wasn't perfect. Tate's grin faltered slightly. Oh, here we go, he scoffed. Let me guess, more fake news from soft men and mainstream liars? No, Jonathan replied quietly. These are your words, your voice, your truth, unedited. The studio fell silent. Roumie held up his phone so the camera could see the screen. This is you, Andrew, on your podcast from March 2023. Just listen. He pressed play. Tate's voice filled the studio. I don't believe in any of this God stuff. It's just leverage. People are sheep. They want to be told what's right. If you quote scripture with confidence, they'll follow you. That's power. The silence was suffocating. Anderson Cooper blinked slowly. Even Tate looked like he hadn't expected that one. Roumie continued, and here's you again, 2 months later, saying something different. He played another clip. Tate's voice again. Religion is a tool. You use it to control weak men. It's not about truth, it's about dominance. Tate's jaw tensed, his fingers twitched. But Roumie wasn't done. So, he asked calmly, which Andrew are we speaking to today? The one who claims to defend faith, or the one who manipulates it for power? The tension shattered. Gasps could be heard behind the camera. And for the first time in the segment, Andrew Tate didn't have a response. Roumie didn't gloat. He didn't raise his voice. He simply looked at him, not with anger, but with sorrow. Truth matters, he said. And when people place their trust in someone, especially using God's name, that trust should not be abused. Tate tried to recover. That's out of context, he muttered. Those clips are private. That wasn't for the public. Exactly, Roumie replied. But when someone says different things depending on who's listening, when truth becomes a tool instead of a standard, that's not leadership. That's performance. The moral gravity of that moment was unmistakable. Tate had walked into the studio expecting to dominate a man he thought would be meek. Instead, he found himself quietly dismantled by someone who had no need to shout. And Jonathan Roumie had just begun. Tate's face turned red. "Oh, so now it's a moral trial, is it?" he snapped. Jonathan remained steady, unbothered. "Let's test that theory," he said softly. "Let's hear what you had to say about accountability when it wasn't aimed at you." He tapped his phone. A clip played. Tate in 2021, mocking a political figure embroiled in scandal. "If you break the law, you pay the price. Doesn't matter who you are. That's how strength works. Weaklings whine about persecution. Men own their choices." The contrast was brutal. Roumie slowly turned toward the camera. "So when it's someone else," he said, voice low but unwavering, "the law is sacred. But when it's you, when it's your name on the indictment, it suddenly becomes persecution." The hypocrisy was thunderous. Tate, visibly rattled, dropped the smirk. He tried to claw his way out the only way he knew how. Personal attack. "You know what, Jonathan," he growled. "You and your little Jesus act can play these gotcha games all you want, but the real world sees through you. You're just another soft man trying to sound righteous. You act like humility is power, but the world isn't built by men like you. It's built by men like me." The room froze. Anderson Cooper went still. The production crew shifted uncomfortably, and Jonathan Roumie's expression turned to ice. "Excuse me?" he said quietly, like a whisper wrapped in steel. Tate realized what he'd just said, but it was too late. "You meant exactly what you said," Roumie replied. "And now everyone watching knows exactly who you are." He didn't raise his voice. He didn't flinch. "I'm soft because I bring evidence of your lies. I'm weak because I didn't interrupt you while you bragged about manipulating people's faith for power." He leaned in slightly, never losing his calm. "You want to know what does make me angry, Andrew? It's men who invoke God while mocking him behind closed doors. It's men who call themselves truth tellers while laughing at the very people who trust them. It's men who tell young boys to dominate rather than to serve, to crush others instead of carry them." Then he held up his phone again. "And since you want to make this personal," he said, "let's talk about what you really think of your own followers." Another recording began to play. A private voice memo, leaked months ago, largely ignored by the mainstream press. Tate's voice rang out. "They'll believe anything. Say it loud, say it confident, and they eat it up. These guys worship me because they're lost. I don't care what's true. I care what works." The silence that followed was complete. Tate's face went from crimson to pale to ash gray. His lips moved, but no sound came out. His hands trembled ever so slightly. Jonathan looked at him with calm disappointment. "That's you, Andrew. Calling your own followers lost. Saying truth doesn't matter. So go ahead. Tell America again how you're saving masculinity." For the first time in his career, Andrew Tate was silent. Completely, utterly defeated. He tried to speak twice, but couldn't get the words to land. His body slumped slightly forward. The man who had built a digital empire by shouting over everyone else had been brought to complete stillness by a man who never raised his voice. What made the moment so devastating was the contrast. Roumie sat tall and composed, like a shepherd who had just driven off a wolf. His expression was one of clarity, not vengeance. His eyes sharp, but not hateful. His voice steady, like someone who had walked into battle already knowing how it would end. Tate, meanwhile, looked like a man whose empire had been built on sand, and the tide had just come in. The silence lasted only seconds, but felt eternal. Social media exploded. Clips, screenshots, reaction threads poured in before the moment even finished. The hashtag #Roumie silences Tate was trending within 5 minutes. People described it as watching arrogance collapse in real time. One TikTok remix featured the moment Tate's face dropped, set to a Gregorian chant. On Instagram, memes flooded timelines. Split-screen image. Tate, arms crossed at the start versus eyes wide, hands shaking at the end. Caption: "Blessed are the meek, for they shall own the moment." YouTube reaction videos with titles like Jonathan Roumie just ended Andrew Tate's career in 3 clips. How calm truth can destroy loud lies. Anderson Cooper, still stunned, finally turned to Tate. Andrew, do you have a response? Tate mumbled something about deepfakes and liberal media traps, but no one was listening. He didn't even believe his own defense. Roumie delivered the final blow, not with anger, but grace. Andrew, for years you've made millions telling young men that domination is power, that truth is flexible, that belief is leverage. You've torn down trust. You've replaced faith with ego. And now, caught in your own words, you want to talk about betrayal? He paused, then added, I'm not here to humiliate you. I'm here to hold a mirror to what you've become, and I'm sorry that no one did it sooner. The camera panned slowly. Tate sat in silence, a man unmasked. Roumie looked into the lens. His final words were not for Tate, they were for the country. The world needs truth, not noise. Integrity, not intimidation. Faith that builds, not power that breaks. We deserve better than false prophets with microphones. We deserve real men who speak with clarity, conviction, and compassion. The moment when Andrew Tate's jaw visibly dropped became an instant GIF. Within an hour, it was being shared across every major social media platform. From political subreddits to relationship drama threads, people used it to react to everything from failed proposals to sports meltdowns. His stunned expression, wide-eyed, mouth half open, hands frozen midair, became a universal symbol for getting absolutely wrecked. Conservative Twitter melted down. Tate's defenders scrambled to justify what had just happened. But the audio clips were too clear. His own voice, in his own words, had exposed a years-long pattern of manipulation, contradiction, and shallow bravado. Even his most loyal followers couldn't deny what they had just heard with their own ears. Some tried familiar tactics. It's a setup. Roumie edited the clips. CNN ambushed him. But those defenses crumbled quickly. People could hear the full recordings themselves. And context didn't help Tate. It made him look worse. One viral tweet said it best. Andrew Tate just got spiritually cross-examined by the guy who plays Jesus. Game over. It racked up over 150,000 retweets in the first hour. Liberal Twitter celebrated like it was Easter Sunday, and the World Cup final rolled into one. The memes flowed immediately. A photo of Tate before and after the segment. Caption, how it started versus how it's going. His shocked face with the line, when you realize your ego just lost a quiet truth. A remix of his breakdown synced to gospel choir music, the humbling of Andrew. But it wasn't just partisan noise. Political Twitter, often bitterly divided, found rare unity in acknowledging what they just witnessed, a total collapse. Even conservative commentators who disagreed with Roumie's worldview had to admit he came with receipts, and he delivered them with grace and precision. A Fox News contributor tweeted, I don't agree with Jonathan Roumie's theology, but this wasn't acting. This was preparation. This was control. This is how you win arguments, with facts, not volume. The tweet went viral, igniting debates about whether truth should matter more than tribalism. News outlets scrambled to cover the fallout. CNN ran the clip on repeat in every news cycle. MSNBC opened with it in primetime. Even Fox News, while trying to minimize its impact, couldn't ignore the sheer magnitude of the collapse. The Washington Post headline read, Actor Jonathan Roumie uses Tate's own words to dismantle online empire. The New York Times called it a masterclass in moral confrontation. And perhaps most revealing, there was what came from veteran journalists, those who had watched Tate dominate panels, outtalk interviewers, and bulldoze conversations for years. One reporter tweeted, I've covered Andrew Tate since 2019. I've never seen him this shaken. Not when he was banned, not when he was charged, only today, when truth was spoken calmly and the mirror was held up. Behind the scenes, Tate's camp was in full panic mode. His podcast was delayed. His social channels went silent. His handlers were scrambling for a narrative that could do damage control. Publicists were flooded with calls. Crisis managers were summoned. Lawyers were consulted. And yet, there was nothing to attack. Roumie hadn't insulted. He hadn't shouted. He had simply presented the truth. And worst of all for Tate, the evidence was him. How do you fight your own voice? His first attempt at recovery came through surrogates. Influencers aligned with him claimed deepfakes, AI manipulations, or editing tricks. But none of it stuck. Multiple outlets verified the clips, the tone, the timestamps, the metadata, all authentic. When Tate finally reappeared on his live stream 3 days later, The tone was different. He ranted but without rhythm. He tried to blame the deep state, claimed Roumie used Hollywood mind games, and accused the media of conspiring against him. "They're trying to crucify me with my own words," he shouted. But it only got worse. If the words weren't yours, why not deny them? If they were yours, how do you justify them? He couldn't answer either. Even some of his fans called in, sounding unsure. "Andrew, that was your voice, man. I've watched all your videos. You said those things. Why?" Tate cut the call. The damage was done. But this was bigger than Tate. This wasn't just a personal embarrassment. It was a new model, a blueprint for confronting modern demagogues. No shouting, no theatrics, just calm, truth, receipts. Other public figures, especially those in faith-based and political communities, started studying Roumie's method. Stay composed. Let the aggressor overplay the abandon. Then bring out the evidence and let it speak for itself. People began calling it the Roumie method, and it started working. The confrontation sent a message that echoed far beyond social media or celebrity scandal. It became a cultural reckoning. In an age dominated by disinformation, performance politics, and manufactured outrage, Jonathan Roumie had reminded the world of something many feared was lost. Truth still matters. Evidence still matters. Accountability still matters. And perhaps most surprisingly, still moves people, especially young people. They saw in Roumie not a celebrity sermonizer or moral showman, but something real. A man who didn't just criticize corruption, he exposed it. A man who didn't match ego with ego, he matched arrogance with quiet clarity. Within days, the clip was being shown in political science classrooms across U.S. universities, not for its entertainment value, but as an example of effective rhetorical strategy in a post-truth era. Law schools started referencing the exchange to demonstrate the power of preparation, composure, and evidence in dismantling lies without ever resorting to personal attacks or emotional spirals. In the weeks following the confrontation, Andrew Tate's influence began to noticeably wither. His podcast numbers plummeted. Speaking fees dried up. Even some of his brand sponsors distanced themselves. Former allies in the manosphere stopped quoting him. Even Donald Trump Jr., once friendly toward Tate, subtly unfollowed him on social media. And more critically, the audio clips Roumie had revealed were now being cited in multiple civil cases surrounding digital manipulation, fraudulent advertising practices, and incitement rhetoric. Legal analysts speculated that the recordings might soon be subpoenaed as evidence in broader investigations into online radicalization tactics. But the most profound effect was in the media landscape itself. Producers and hosts began instituting new ground rules. No claims without citations, no attacks without sources. The era of giving provocateurs a microphone without pushback was coming to a close. Roumie's approach, calm, spiritual, surgical, inspired a new standard. Political scientists coined the phrase, the Roumie effect, defined as the methodical use of a subject's own words, presented without emotional reactivity, to expose falsehoods and restore public trust through composure and truth. It wasn't a new tactic in theory. Opposition researchers had long compiled damaging clips, but what Roumie did was different. In scale, execution, and tone. He didn't deliver a gotcha, he delivered a mirror. And he never once let the room forget that he was there not to punish, but to reveal. Soon, training sessions began popping up across political and media spaces. Seminars titled Prosecutorial Poise, Winning with Truth. The Roumie Method, Leading with Clarity in a Hostile Age. Silencing the noise without raising your voice. Roumie himself was invited to host nonpartisan workshops, not for actors, but for public servants, faith leaders, student journalists, and debate teams. The demand was so overwhelming that venues had to be upgraded to accommodate thousands. He would stand in front of crowded rooms and calmly repeat the same principle. Let them bury themselves with their lies. You don't need rage, you need patience and receipts. The workshops taught everything from binding, media literacy and transcript analysis, psychology of public confrontation, faith-based resilience in hostile environments, how to respond to manipulation without losing your peace, and the ripple effects reached beyond America. International media outlets, particularly in Europe and South America, highlighted the confrontation as a model of democracy fighting back against digital demagoguery. The BBC ran a segment, Silencing the Loud, What We Can Learn from Jonathan Roumie. German news called it Ein Meisterstück der Wahrheit, a masterpiece of truth. A respected French columnist wrote, In 20 minutes, Jonathan Roumie reminded us that integrity is not weakness. It is the greatest strength of all. The clip was subtitled into Portuguese, Spanish, French, German, and Arabic. Universities in the UK, Canada, Brazil, and Australia added it to their democracy and media ethics curricula. Brazilian democracy activists began using it to train students on how to respond to populist rhetoric without matching rage for rage. Hungarian opposition parties quietly passed around the clip as a case study in truthful resistance. Even French President Emmanuel Macron's communications team was reported to have circulated the video internally as an example of nonviolent confrontation with high emotional impact. What amazed global observers wasn't just that Roumie's method worked, it was that it had happened on American television, a medium many had dismissed as hopelessly shallow and entertainment-obsessed. This wasn't soundbite theater, it was substance, it was restraint, it was truth, televised. For years, foreign media had written off American political discourse as hopeless, all shouting soundbites and self-promotion, a circus of ego where truth never stood a chance. But Jonathan Roumie's performance shattered that perception. His quiet, evidence-based confrontation with Andrew Tate reminded the world that serious, principled dialogue was still possible in America. And it wasn't just Americans who noticed. In Brazil, where Bolsonaro-style populism had left deep scars, democracy advocates added Portuguese subtitles to the clip and began using it in candidate training programs for local elections. In Hungary, opposition leaders studied Roumie's tactics as they prepared to face allies of Viktor Orban in national debates. In India, segments of Roumie's calm dismantling of Tate were translated into Hindi and shared by critics of Narendra Modi, who saw it as a blueprint for resisting authoritarian manipulation without descending into rage or chaos. Jonathan Roumie's global stature began to rise. Invitations flooded in from Berlin, London, and Toronto for him to speak at democracy forums, media ethics panels, and interfaith summits. Academic institutions, both secular and religious, reached out asking him to lecture on the intersection of truth, media, and moral courage. Democratic institutes around the world wanted to learn from his approach to confronting lies without becoming aggressive and restoring public trust without losing dignity. As the dust settled, one thing was clear. This was not a viral clip. It was a cultural moment, a turning point in how truth could be defended, not with louder voices, but with calm receipts, moral clarity, and quiet resolve. Andrew Tate's humiliation may have been the headline, but the real story was what began that day. The age of accountability had arrived, and Jonathan Roumie had shown the world that you don't need to shout to lead, you just need to be ready. In a democracy under stress, that was a revelation, and it struck especially deep with the next generation. Across the US, young people began to say, I want to be like Jonathan Roumie when I grow up. Law school applications saw a surprising bump. Political science programs reported increased enrollments. Churches and universities began hosting truth and media panels inspired by the confrontation. And the message couldn't have been clearer. Truth matters. Facts matter. Preparation beats bluster. Every single time. The segment that was supposed to be Andrew Tate's latest publicity play instead became his complete and total unraveling. Jonathan Roumie didn't just win a debate. He redefined what leadership looks like. He proved that faith and evidence are not opposites, that you can speak firmly and kindly at the same time, that in an age of digital chaos, composure is a weapon. As the story spread through newsrooms and classrooms around the globe, one thing became obvious. This wasn't the end. This was the beginning. Andrew Tate might have been the first to face the Roumie treatment, but he wouldn't be the last. And as millions rewatched the moment Tate's own words crumbled beneath him, one truth stood tall. If you lie long enough, eventually someone will bring the evidence. And when they do, no volume can save you. If you were moved watching Jonathan Roumie calmly dismantle arrogance with truth and faith, don't forget to like this story and subscribe for more powerful moments where integrity triumphs over ego. Because in these times, we don't just need louder leaders, we need braver ones. We need more like Jonathan Roumie. Who do you think should face the Roumie treatment next? Let us know in the comments and share this story with anyone who's forgotten what real courage looks like.